And is that in here as well? It is opposition as well. I haven't gotten that far. Thank you.
Yeah, we put it all out there.
Very good. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Hill and members. Cindy Tuck with the Association of California Water Agencies. ACWA's members are public water agencies across the state. We have about 440 members, and collectively they provide about 90% of the water in the state for drinking water, for business, and for agriculture. We have an oppose unless amended position on SB 848. We do support the current version of the bond that's on the ballot, but our board has decided that we should work with the legislature on changes this year to improve the chances of passage for the bond. We'd like the bond to pass in 2014. We think the state needs to unite. The drought has really taught all of us lessons about water supply reliability, the need for solutions. So we think this is the year to come together on a solution. So you may ask, why are we opposed unless amended on this bill? We think that the bill falls short in two principal funding categories, and those are Delta sustainability and storage. On Delta sustainability, we think the level should be at $2.25 billion. That's what's in the current version of the bond, as opposed to $1 billion. And on storage, we think the number should be at $3 billion instead of $1 billion for projects. The $3 billion is the current number in the current version of the bond. And in the current version of the bond, the storage money is continuously appropriated, and we think that's also appropriate. Now, you may say this is Senate EQ, Senate Environmental Quality Committee. We're not here to talk about storage, but I think it's important to note the linkage between drinking water and storage. Yesterday, there was a joint committee on the Assembly side, Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials, and the Health Committee, talking about communities running out of drinking water in California and what are the solutions for those communities. And so if you're running out of drinking water, that is a fundamental drinking water problem. And the administration's working very hard on that, and I know the legislature's concerned about that. When you look at drought, what's scary is we're not getting the rain we need, but we also don't have the water in storage. So we need, for future droughts, we've got to be investing as a state in storage, and we think $3 billion is the right number. But two other issues that are talked about in your analysis. One is recycling, and we appreciate that there's significant funding in this proposal for recycling, but we think it should be, for recycling dollars, those should come out of the IRWIMP chapter, the Integrated Regional Water Management chapter, and have a separate chapter for recycling with $500 million in it. So that's one specific suggestion. That issue is raised in the analysis. Another issue is on groundwater cleanup money. Groundwater, as many of you know in your communities, contaminated groundwater, treating that is very expensive. The current version of the bond has $1 billion just for groundwater cleanup. We would suggest having at least $300 million in separate money, not in the storage chapter, not in the IRWIMP chapter, but separate money for groundwater, at least $300 million in the bond proposals this year. We recognize that Senator Woken, this measure has significant funding for water quality generally. She has significant funding for disadvantaged communities. That's very important. But because there's not enough funding in the bond for the Delta sustainability, storage, and groundwater, we have an oppose unless amended position on the bill, and we do urge a no vote.
Do you have a suggestion on where that money would come from?
That
you're proposing? I mean, you named a number of things,
yes,
items that should be included and were in the original bond that
yes,
was approved. And I guess the reason we're reconsidering that is the trying to get to a probability of success at the ballot.
Yes.
And so I guess the concern is if we added all of those things back into it, how do you think we would get to success?
Very good question, because I think, like everybody here, we want success on this, and I know Senator Woke does. But we think the bond can be higher than the amount that's in this bond. There's going to be more polling done probably in the March timeframe, and we think that will show that the public knows there needs to be investment in water, and the number can be higher. We think it needs to be lower than $11.14 billion, lower than $10 billion, but polling will help show what a good number is. But we think something like around 9 right now is what we're thinking. So we think there could be more money.
Thank you very much for that. Good morning.
Morning, Mr. Chair and members. Ed Manning on behalf of 3 water agencies, Mojave Water Agency, a state water contractor, Western Municipal Water District, a Met member agency in Riverside County, and Westlands Water District, large agricultural water district. There was a couple policy issues that I'd like to highlight that are of concern, along with some of the funding priorities. First, I'd echo with what was just said by Aqua about the fact that there was over $1 billion each for water reclamation and water recycling in the Cogdill bond on the ballot. That is a critical drinking water quality and supply issue in Southern California. And I think many of the urban agencies that we work with think that's vital and will not support the bond unless there's significant funding and dedicated chapters for that purpose. Second, there's language in the bond about reducing imports, which is contrary to the language we negotiated in 2009. It has significant policy implications. It's being litigated. The existing language is in, it's highlighted in the committee analysis as well in about 7 or 8 places where that language appears. It's not the language in the 2009 bill. I raised this in the last policy committee hearing. The bill will draw significant opposition if that language doesn't get changed to reflect the 2009 language. The third thing is, it was interesting to hear Mr. Akita talking about they need new conveyance for water quality and ESA purposes. They're not the only conveyance project out there that is being considered for those 2 purposes. Obviously, the BDCP process is part of the reason driving it, is both the ESA issues at the intake and water quality issues. The language in the bond for that provides funding for Delta restoration and enhancement gives the money to the Delta Conservancy. In the 2009 legislation, that language in that bond does not give all the money to the Delta Conservancy. It gives the money to a variety of agencies, including the Delta Conservancy, because the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, which is, by the way, over $160 million so far spent just on the plan, over 8 years in the works, foresees a number of agencies at the state and federal level working cooperatively on restoration and enhancement in the Delta. And you can't have one agency, the Delta Conservancy, be in charge of all that money. They're not equipped, and they're not the right agency. We'd be happy to talk to how it could be structured. And lastly, the language in the 2009 bond specifically recognizes that that money will be used in cooperation with and coordination with BDCP. There's a specific paragraph in the 2009 bond, and that language also does not appear in this bond, and that's hugely problematic because we're $160 million into the BDCP plan, and the notion that this money could be used for restoration that's not consistent with the Delta plan or not consistent with BDCP would be extremely troubling. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manning. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Hill and members of the committee. Danny Merkley with the California Farm Bureau. We really appreciate the Senator working on this important issue, representing farmers statewide and the diversity that we have. We also recognize the challenges with crafting something that is going to meet everyone's needs. With that, the concerns that we do have stem around storage. As was said earlier, storage is key to water quality improvements. We applaud the effort towards the disadvantaged communities. That is very important to us as well. But with regard to storage, the key parts to that are making the system more flexible for climate change, for the way we see precipitation, so that we can take the gulps when they're available and have it there, not only to manage our surface water supplies, but also our groundwater supplies, and do a better job of recharging those and managing those as well. But again, that volume of water is key to capture when it's available so that we can protect water quality. We believe it needs to be continuously appropriated. The reason for that is very evident in our current reservoir levels and the drought that we're in right now. Without the continuous appropriation, it challenges the competitive review process at moving forward in a timely manner and puts all Californians and the environment at risk. So we need to move expeditiously on that. With that, I will close by saying I've enjoyed working with the senator for over 25 years when the senator was the mayor of Davis and I was a farmer next door, and the gentleman to her left's boss put us on a committee to work on water issues for the city of Davis, for the environment, and for agriculture. I was actually doing real work at that time, farming for a living.
How'd that turn out for you, Danny?
My dad said I was too involved, and I woke up wearing a necktie one day in Sacramento.
There you go. Mr. Chairman,
Good morning, Mr. Nelson.
he's always tough to follow. Richard Harris, the Nossman firm, on behalf of Water Reuse. We're not opposed to this bond. We're not in favor of this bond. We're here to give the legislature information about what is turning into being a favored subject. So after doing this for about 15 years, it's kind of cool. Recycling is starting to be recognized really for the resource that it is. And Senator Wolk, I think, in her bond has captured that in many places. And Water Reuse appreciates that and would like to remain eligible in the places through IRWIMP funding and other places. It makes sense. But your committee rightly points out on page 22 of the analysis a point that we made in the earlier hearing regarding a standalone program of funding for recycling. Since the early 1970s, every bond that was put before the voters that the legislature put before had actually a portion in it for, at the time called reclamation, but then became recycling funding, starting with SRF loans, and then in 2000, I had a little hand in that bond. We turned some of the grant money, loan money, into grants, and the legislature put that forward. The non-legislative bonds that were put forward after that, Prop 50 and Prop 84, established the IRWIMP program, and there's competitive regional funding. That's great. We think that. But we think we also should not lose sight of that original notion that recycling and reuse projects, because of what they are, deserve a concentrated funding stream, if you will. And that program is established, is run very, very well at the State Water Board. And we think that's just where the money ought to go. It's very similar to what this bond is putting forward in the new category for the stormwater, and that money is being given to the board, which we think makes a lot of sense too. And we thank Senator Pavley for that, because I think a lot of our member agencies will be people involved in trying to figure out those sorts of systems on how you're going to capture that stormwater as it is. So, separate pot of funding. I'm not going to talk about numbers. Whatever the legislature in its wisdom determines makes the most sense. To your point of probability of success, I will just say that the word recycling is very, very popular with voters, and the amount of funding that you can give recycling so that recycling becomes up a little bit closer and then is put into a title and summary, I think, frankly, that would make a lot of sense, if for no other reason, the probability of success. And I want to say one final thing. Right now, I think Senator Steinberg and the governor are out at Mather, and there's or a little later this morning, there's a...
2 o'clock.
Okay, good. Then I haven't missed it. I'd much rather be here with you all.
Of course.
And talking about the drought response, our member agencies did a survey and have updated it now within the last couple of months. We have found there are 41 projects right now ready to go to about 199,000 acre-feet of water that can be brought on in the next 1 to 3 years. And I say acre-feet of water because recycled water is actually new water. If you only had 1 gallon and you reused it again, now you have 2 gallons. So it really is the only new source of water. So it's near term, it's new, about 200,000. But that's a cost of about $1.15 billion. And that's a cost, an overall capital cost that needs to be shared between local ratepayers and the state and sometimes the federal government in a partnership because of the ultimate benefits that go to all of kind of those sectors of society. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Appreciate it. Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Members of the committee, Kathy Cole with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. Actually, the letter that we delivered to the committee members and your staff yesterday, which attached our board-adopted policy principles that our board considered back in March of last year, which has actually served us well as we navigate, pardon the pun, through all the various water bonds that are out there. I think we now have a total of 5. I expect we're going to see a couple more. So we, too, are not going to get involved in the timing of when it should be on the ballot or the overall dollar amount. We think that's for folks to decide, above my pay grade, certainly, leadership, fiscal experts, after some current voter surveys. So our focus on the bond has been on the policy side, and we want to make sure that it does no harm to our priorities as outlined by our board. We do support the provisions in Senator's bill on the disadvantaged communities. One of our priorities is, in fact, a recognition that these communities need some relief, that they are out of compliance, and it's time for a broader public benefit, state dollars, GO bonds, to step up and be used for bringing those systems into compliance. We do have concerns, though, on some of the policy. SB 848, in our view, does impose mitigation requirements beyond CEQA, as we've noted in our letter. I won't replicate the comments of my colleague, Mr. Manning, on the Delta Conservancy concerns. I think for Metropolitan, our top priority is to make sure we see a pathway for critical investments that are necessary for restoring the Delta. And right now, the Delta restoration projects would compete against a long list of eligible projects for Delta sustainability purposes. We do believe very strongly that there is a broad public benefit associated with restoring that Delta ecosystem to a condition that can support the water, the environment, the stewardship responsibilities in the Delta. So right now, when we look at SB 848, we say that it falls short of our policy principles. We do look forward to working with the Senator and her staff on revisiting some of our concerns in this matter. And we appreciate your time and look forward to working with you and other members of the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Cole. Good morning.
Mr. Chairman, members, Mike Dillon representing the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, most of the major wastewater agencies, including some of the large cities. We would like to strongly emphasize creating a separate pot for recycled water. I won't re-echo the comments of Mr. Harris, but earlier Barry Broad mentioned the example of Sacramento Regional, one of our members, and their use of recycled water. One of the ones that's just been brought to our attention is in the city of San Francisco. They're working out an agreement with a huge Silicon Valley tech firm to use recycled water in these very large servers that are as much as a block long and use thousands of gallons of water to cool them, and so that frees up potable water for drinking water and other purposes. So every day we're finding more and more uses of recycled water, and so I would encourage, again, the funding that's in the measure, but also creating the separate pot. There's a proven track record there for how our agencies apply for those funds, and we would like to see that continue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dillon. Appreciate it.
Good morning,
Cruz.
Steve Cruz, on behalf of the California Building Industry Association. We're similarly in an opposed and less amended position. Appreciate the efforts by Senator Woke, particularly some of the new things related to stormwater capture and reuse. That's important to home builders. However, at this point, we are still concerned with the sort of lack of commitment on both dollar amounts and the guarantee of the funding for some of the storage chapters, and also increased investment needed for the Delta ecosystem restoration work. But appreciate her effort, and we'll continue to work with her and other members to try to move a bond forward this year.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz. Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Chair, Member Shane Levine on behalf of the Western Growers Association. Also have the same policy concerns already articulated by Mr. Manning, so I won't go into all those again, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. Appreciate it. Good morning.
Morning. Valerie Nero for the California Chamber of Commerce. We too are opposed to the bill and would like to associate ourselves with the comments made by Aqua and Farm Bureau regarding storage and data sustainability funding.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, Steve Baker, last but not least, Steve Baker with Aaron Reed and Associates for the Upper San Gabriel Valley Municipal Water District, excuse me. We're in the same camp as others with respect to having a separate pot of money on recycled water, and appreciate all the efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Others who would like to speak in opposition or have concerns on the bill? Seeing no one, we'll bring it back to the committee. And Very good. Questions? Yes, Senator Pavlik. Good morning. Of course, I think now is the time. If there are questions, we can include it all in one.
Just, we had a long hearing on this proposal just last week, right, Senator Woke? And thought it went very well, and it was broader, the whole bond, and what our focus is here today. But I wanted to articulate for the members some of the issues and concerns that were brought up, and some of my priorities. I've been working collaboratively with Senator Woke to bring this proposal forward. First of all, relating to stormwater, it's on page 20 and 21 in here, and just a little history on why that is considerably more. It used to be called flood management. I view stormwater as an asset, and I was particularly interested in the water supply side of it. If you're from particularly urban areas or suburban areas, capture and reuse of stormwater is critical. If you're down in my neck of the woods or probably along the coast or even in the Bay Area, people wonder why when it rains, we just allow the water to run right into the ocean. We're doing nothing to capture and retain the stormwater. If we're serious about more regional solutions and potentially less water coming through the snowpack and the delta in the long term, investing in stormwater capture and reuse is critically important. And it doesn't just have to happen during rainstorms. Many areas have year-round water in dry weather seasons coming from irrigation of lawns, as long as we have lawns, and washing your car and a variety of other areas. The LA River has water in it all year. You can kayak in the LA River now. Capturing and reusing stormwater. So what is going on in Southern California, and perhaps you have stories in your areas as well, is really an aggressive approach on not just looking at stormwater, cleaning it up to throw it back in the river and getting out, but capturing and reusing it. Doesn't it make sense, for example, to reuse stormwater for all irrigation, Caltrans along the freeway, golf courses, parks, medians, schools? And in fact, we have several really interesting proposals where they've come into school grounds and put cisterns under the paved concrete, opened it up so it can percolate down into the cisterns when it rains, but they're capturing, reusing the stormwater for all their landscaping. It's sort of been a win-win for the school districts as well. We've had bills in the last 2 years. This is what's changed from the 2009 bond. We have had a lot of success stories on stormwater. In fact, a bill that allowed people to have rain barrels. That was controversial. You had some issues in San Francisco. Could the next door neighbors capture and have excess stormwater and then use it here? I think management of stormwater is a critical issue and one the public gets and supports. And there are programs in place ready to go. And that's why it is more. So I would ask that in the amendments taken on this section maybe be worked on between now and when it goes to governance and finance to make sure that there isn't unintended consequences on doing what I consider a really important part of how we increase water supply. This is one of those things. It doesn't cost tons of money, but it increases water supply no matter where you live. I think it can be done more thoughtfully. The second thing is I've been hearing now 2 weeks on recycling. I've sort of, in my mind, come to terms with this is the other huge component on how you increase water supply, stormwater, and better use of recycled water. The Irvine area in Orange County, there's no better success story where you have, I think it's 500,000 people now relying on treated wastewater. They have the right geology. It can be done. I had a bill several years ago requiring Department of Public Health to come up with health standards for implementing recycled water. We're still waiting on them, DPH again. I think you'll see in the governor's drought press conference today trying to expedite the rollout of those health standards. So I think a separate line item, something to consider, Senator Woke, on calling out recycled water. Recycled water and stormwater, I think, are just two critically important pieces on how we look at water management, with an emphasis on regional solutions, given the fact that we're likely to see more periods of drought in the years ahead, and so we've got to be smarter. The third thing is on groundwater cleanup. Not sure in the bond if we really focus on when we expend monies to make sure the best management practices are part of the expenditure of monies, because what we don't want to do is spend all the money for groundwater cleanup and then having the same problems that caused the groundwater to become polluted continue on. So is there best management practices involved? We still have areas of the state that don't have their groundwater managed. It's hard to believe, but it is true, and one of the, I think, few states in the country that don't. I'm hearing efforts that people are now grouping together, realizing groundwater is indeed a finite resource, and there's getting to be, unfortunately, competition between the agricultural uses of limited groundwater. We're facing overdraft. We're facing pollution of groundwater. If you're a small-sized family farm or individual homeowner, they're pumping so far down now you can't even afford to keep up with the larger interest in the competition for groundwater. That's got to be an incredibly important focus in the 2014 version of this water plan. I've also listened carefully to representatives from the Sierra, I think your turf, Senator Gaines. 60% of the water supply, indeed, comes from the Sierra. I think either the Sierra Nevadas Conservancy or whoever the proper entities are, additional monies with some guidance and criteria, I think would be a smart investment. I took a tour the other day up to Orville Dam. One of the unintended consequences of the drought, yes, there's less water, but they're very close to affecting their whole energy supply, because in Northern California, we don't have this so much in Southern California, when you have the reservoirs dramatically dropping, you're not going to have hydroelectric power. So you're going to be facing the water crisis plus the energy crisis all coming together. So I think working collaboratively together, we can come up with a 2014 water package that complements the drought policies that'll be coming forward today at the 2 p.m. press conference. We've looked at flood management in a whole different way, and that's sort of my overview of this. So let's watch about amendments. You expressed some concern on page 13, amendments that we've got the wording right so that we recognize that there may be changes in how we look at water supply and water quality at the same time. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Pavley. Other comments or questions? Yes, Senator Gaines.
I'd just like to make a couple of comments, if I could. And I do have a concern about the dollar allocation for new storage, additional storage. And because we were talking about $3 billion, it looks like it's $900 million in your proposal. And I think Senator Pavley brought up some really great points that are valid, and certainly we want to look at opportunities to recycle water and capture it. I'm in full support of that. My concern is, as the state grows, how do we make sure that we have adequate water supply? And if in the next couple of decades we're looking at closer to 50 million people in the state, are we properly planning for that in the future? I have questions on the ability to recycle and what those costs are. I'd like to see, if I could, the gentleman from Nossaman spoke about capturing 199,000 acre-feet of additional water for $1.3 billion. What does it cost to build an additional reservoir, or what does it cost per acre-feet for ground storage water? And then looking at what the inputs are too, because if you're producing energy in a normal year where you're offsetting costs potentially with energy production, that's another element that probably ought to be taken into consideration. I want to thank you for bringing this forward, because I think you're really addressing a lot of critical issues, but because of those concerns, I will not be able to support it currently. I want to stay in communication with you as things move forward, because who knows what vehicle will be used ultimately in terms of solving our water crisis here in California. So thank you.